I'm Ryan Niemeyer, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a web development tool, an IDE called WebStorm. I'm a JavaScript engineer at a company called Append2. Append2 is 100% remote, so I work remotely with people around the country. I work on our solutions delivery team, so I work on client projects. Append2 is kind of unique because we really focus just on front-end projects, so we usually work with companies that have a development team, and we help them augment their front-end staff. We do front-end projects for them. In my spare time, I like open source a lot. I work with Knockout.js and some plugins and things for it. So today I just wanted to go pretty fast, about 20 minutes, about a tool called WebStorm. I'm not affiliated with it in any way. I just really enjoy using it. But first I kind of want to get an idea, just out of curiosity, what editors that you guys are using. How about Sublime? Any Sublime users? You know, people that you regularly use any of these tools, Sublime. How about Visual Studio? Okay. How about like Eclipse? About like Notepad, Notepad++, Windows, Notepad++, nice tool. Other tools, Vim, anybody? Vim, okay. Any others? NetBeans, okay. How about WebStorm? Anybody use WebStorm? PHP Storm, RubyMine, use any of those tools?
Used it in the past.
Sure. Any other notable editors people like out there?
RubyMine.
RubyMine, sure. Okay. So I'm going to talk about WebStorm a little bit. It's a text editor, but it has a lot more. It's really designed for web development. It's created by JetBrains. They make a lot of different tools, like ReSharper if you're a .NET person. They make RubyMine, PHP Storm, other IDEs. It says IntelliJ powered, so they have kind of a base IDE, a base layer that they write IDEs on top of. So I'm not really going to differentiate between what's part of WebStorm and what's part of that, but we'll show you what WebStorm can do. It's pretty affordable. I think the license is $49 right now is the current license for it. There's also an open source license. You could get a free license if you do open source work. $29 upgrade license, so license gives you a year's worth of upgrades to it. It's pretty affordable. Sometimes they have sales around holiday times, half price kind of deals, so keep an eye out for that. So I want to go through just kind of quickly 20 things that I like about it. I'm going to sit down here because I'm going to go over to the editor. So one thing, it has a built-in web server to serve up static content. It works pretty nicely. So if I'm in some project and I see a file that I want to see in a browser, I can just right-click on it. I can say Open in Browser. And maybe I should take it out of presentation mode. So anyways, it has a static server that's running all the time based on whatever project you have open. So, I mean, it's not hard to host your own server with static files. A lot of times I still will host my own in other ways, but it's kind of nice to open up a test file or open up whatever just to have an actual web server available to you. So that's one thing that I kind of enjoy about it, and you can configure what port that it runs on, and so that was the first thing that is pretty handy about it. It has some live reload stuff built in, so if I do, let's find something here I can look at. If I open a file, let's say I want to debug it, it has live edit stuff going on, so let's see if I can split these quickly. So if I start modifying some text here, you can see it updating on the right side. So it has that live edit built in. That includes CSS, JavaScript. It does a pretty nice job with it. I don't use it all the time, but it is built into it, and they have plugins for different browsers that get installed as you, when you install WebStorm. So, like I said, CSS, HTML, JavaScript changes, they'll be right in your browser. It has Ambit built in, or Zen coding. Has anybody used that? Familiar with it a little bit? It's it's a little hard to just ingrain it in your brain to start using it, but it gives you the ability to do things like div times 3 tab, and it'll give you 3 divs, or let's see, can do like p times 3 lorem, give me 3 lorem ipsum paragraphs there. It takes a little getting used to, you can do things like classes, I can, p.row or something. It takes a little getting used to, and it's not specific to WebStorm. It's a tool out there that's available in other editors as well as a plugin. But once you get used to it, you can really blow through prototyping content and just putting your markup on the page. So that's Ambit. It used to be called Zen Coding, it's called Ambit now. You can easily plug in external tools into WebStorm. We use Grunt for all of our projects. Anybody Grunt out there? Grunt users like Grunt? So it's pretty easy to plug in tools.
Never gets tired of that joke.
So it's pretty easy to plug in external tools, and I have a little keystroke here. I can run Grunt whenever I want, just from right inside of WebStorm. I can set it up to do a watch if I want. It's pretty easy to set up these external tools. There's really not much to setting up the tools. I can show you. If I were to edit this, it's pretty much just running Grunt with a parameter of watch with the current directory. So it's very easy to set stuff up like that. In addition to that, in the latest version of WebStorm, it provides you a terminal that's by default opened up to your project directory. So if you prefer to run your commands there, you want to do some Git stuff there, you want to run Grunt or other tools, you have that terminal. And sometimes for me, at least, it's one less window I have floating around trying to find the right editor, the right terminal that's open to the current directory. So it's kind of handy. You can open multiple tabs as well if you like. To-do tracking has a special system to kind of track to-dos. So, if you have to-do statements in your code, it will turn them different colors, but then it also has tracking in here to be able to keep track of the different to-dos that you have in your programs. And you can jump right to them. It also, when you're committing code, it will remind you that there are to-dos out there. So it's something kind of small, but it's nice that it treats it a little bit different than just normal comments. You can also configure it with some regexes and things like that to decide exactly what you want a to-do to mean. Kind of handy, at least, that it's called out a little different than a normal comment. Okay, support for other languages and watchers for those. So WebStorm has pretty good support for some of the other languages for writing styles and CoffeeScript, TypeScript, Less, Sass, Stylus, things like that. It has pretty decent syntax highlighting along with IntelliSense, but it also has the ability to watch files. So if you were to add, let's say, if I add a less file, when I come into it, it says, hey, we detected you have this is a less file. We can go ahead and add a watcher for you. And when you add a watcher, it will compile it for you. So when I save my file, now it'll nest it underneath there. So this file is actually in that directory, but from the IDE standpoint, it will actually show it to you collapsed under there. So we use Grunt to do stuff like that, but if you're on kind of a one-off project and you want to do something like that, that's pretty good to support to do that for all different kinds of files. So I can do CoffeeScript files. Just out of curiosity about some of these different technologies and how many people use CoffeeScript. How about TypeScript? TypeScript, Rob. And as far as styles, how about Less? Sass, Compass. How about Stylus? I like Stylus. I'm kind of on the Stylus right now. But yeah, so it's pretty nice, and it does actually have some pretty decent, it understands what these files are about. So if you were to search for a variable, it's able to pull up the different variables. It can do that across files that are in the same directory, so it can actually, it understands more than just the syntax highlighting. It can do more than that. So things like variables, and it'll make sure the syntax is correct. So it does a pretty nice job with some of those different languages. So diffing. I think the diffing is pretty nice in WebStorm. I mean, you don't necessarily need any other tool to do that diffing. There's a number of different ways that diffing can happen. So I'm just gonna type something else here. So for starters, you can see areas that have changed. If it's green, that means obviously it's something new. If it's this blue, that means you changed something. And what I can do is here I'm actually getting a little hint as far as what the text was, and I can also do things like roll it back. I can pop it into an actual differ, or I can actually copy that to the clipboard. If I want to copy this original text to the clipboard, I could do that as well. Along with that, it has nice, I'm going to talk about source control stuff next, I think, but it has good support for diffing against what's in your source control. And one nice thing that I kind of like about it is that, well, it has the option to, I can say, oh, I don't want to do that, I can take that out. But I can also edit live in here, if I decide that something's wrong, or I see a console.log statement I want to get rid of, or something like that. It's nice that it lets you edit it in there, and then when I come back, it'll already be updated. So that's diffing. I mean, there are a lot of other nice options in here too. Try to see if there's files that would make sense, but if you select two files, you can say you just want to diff those two files. Diffing a minified file against a non-minified, but sometimes that's useful to just take two files and diff them. So there's a lot of nice options for diffing. Source control integration. It does have support for Git and SVN and CDS and Mercurial. And I think TFS. And this has actually been one of the best features for me. Let's talk about source control. How many people use Git? Maybe a lot of people, right? Subversion. Others? Mercurial. TFS, okay. Yeah, and I think everyone would have moved on to Subversion at least 10 plus years ago.
Yeah.
If you're still on CDS, it's supported here. So anyways, like Git is great, but I definitely don't consider myself a Git expert or ninja. I mean, I can get around the command line. I don't mind using the command line, but WebStorm has really nice support for it built in. Enough support that I've never felt like it's doing something wrong for me. It really is nice. So some of the things that you can do, some of the nice things that you can do related to source control. I think it's off a little bit here. I can do branch management right here. Here I got remote branches. I can go ahead and delete remote branches from there. I can merge them. I can do some diffing on that. Here's my local branches. I can check them out, compare them, do things like that, create new branches right from there. It's been pretty handy for me. I do a lot of branching. So that's just right there. So it does have good support for telling you, which files have changed, which files are new, things like that. It actually has an entire change it dialog here where I can see all the files that have changed. Again, I can diff it pretty easily. And when you diff it, you can actually choose a lot of different options as far as what you want to diff it against. You diff it against a branch, things like that. So that's been pretty nice. Some other nice parts of source control. It has, if I want to just sync up with my source control, if I want to do a pull, it can actually have it do a stash and then do a pull with rebase if I want, and then pull that stash out. So all in one step, I can just go ahead and update to the latest code if that's what I want to do. That's been pretty handy. When you push, well, let's go into commit for a second. So when you commit, you get all the files that have changed, double click on it, I can diff it again. I kind of like this. You can actually edit your commit comment while you're diffing. So while I'm looking at it here, you know, I can edit my diff comment or my commit comment because I'm looking at the code I changed. I remember now exactly what I want to say, and when I come back out here, you know, that will have been changed. Can do some analysis on the code when you commit if you want to. So that's worked pretty well for me. You can also, you know, you can show history here, so I can get a list of, you know, the recent commits on a project, and I can double click and see which file was changed and see a diff on that file if I want. I can do that history on a per file basis as well. And if I really care what it's doing, I can get a console telling me what commands it's running. So it's been pretty handy for me. I mean, if I didn't have this, I don't know that I would turn to a GUI, but this doesn't feel like a GUI to me, like a Git GUI. It feels like it's just part of my workflow as far as developing in WebStorm. So it's been pretty one of my favorite parts of WebStorm. Local history, it does keep a local history, so whether you're doing source control or not, it does keep track of local changes. So if I want to look at the local history, I can see when this file was changed, and I can revert to various versions of it. So sometimes, you know, maybe you're not committing as often as you'd like, and you realize that you want to go back to a previous version, or you even just want to see that previous version. It gives you that nice diffing of it, and you can go ahead and revert if you want. Again, you can edit in here, which is kind of nice, so you could even just look at what your code used to look like and make some changes. So it's not a substitution for source control, but you know, it can be handy to have that local history. Templates, so it has the ability to do both macro style templating, so while you're type certain characters, it'll fill in a macro, or you can actually create files that are templates. So when I say I want to add a new file, I can pick from a templated version of it. So for example, in JavaScript, you know, I have one called log that'll do a console.log, and it'll put the cursor, you know, right where I can start typing. So that's one, and there's some other built-in ones, like an iterator one. It'll do a for loop. It'll actually jump me to that variable where I can name it if I want, and you know, as I tap through it, it'll put me on each of the variable names. And you can create all those templates yourself. You can create different variables and where you want the cursor to end up. That's all part of it. And then there's also file templates. So I can say, like, let's say I want to add a new JavaScript file. I can pick from templates that I can design. So here's an AMD file. So if I want to start the file with a little template, I could do that. So I haven't gotten too much into the templating, but I can definitely say how that could be handy if that's something that you like. Hotkeys and shortcuts, just like any editor these days, there's a million different combinations that you could use to perform some of these actions. Some of them that I like the best. I mean, Sublime has this as well. But there's one that's like anything. You know, if I want to find a setting, if I want to find an action, you know, I can do Shift Command A. It'll give me a chance to do that. If I want to find a file, I can start searching for files. One thing that's nice is I can just type partials of the names. Like, let's say I want to find this one called Observable Array Change Tracking Behavior. I can just say OBS track behave. You know, it'll find it partial like that for me. So that's been kind of handy. It doesn't have to be camel case or anything. It's just, I don't know, it's aggressively matching file names, I guess. That's kind of nice. You know, I can pop up version control menu. You know, I can get at all that stuff. I mean, you really can do everything with the keyboard, of course, as you would imagine, from any good editor. I can look at the recent files I edited. If I don't want to be flipping through the tabs up there, I can just pop into whatever file I edited recently. You know, and I can do things like pop this sidebar open and close pretty easily, or go into, you know, I want to look at something on the bottom here, I can flip that open or close. So it has a ton of shortcuts, and you can define your own as well. You know, I have Option Command G runs grunt, and so you can do that. So built-in inspections has JS lint, JS hint, and its own system for inspecting code built in, and you can turn that on in a couple of ways. So let me just flip over to something else. So if I want to do JS hint, I'm not really even going to talk about JS lint because I think most people would just be using JS hint. Anybody out there using JS lint? JS hint? Okay, other tools? Yes, lint? No. So there's two ways that you can turn it on. You can actually turn it on. You can turn it on live in the editor. So of course you can configure all the different settings in JS hint, or you can point it at a JS hint RC file. That's what we usually do because we have a standard set of rules that we want to use. So when you enable that, then it's going to show up just in the editor here. And as I start doing bad things, it will start to tell me that JS hint's telling me I'm missing a semicolon, things like that. So if you don't want to run that as a build step or something, you want that live in there, you can do that. The other way to go is that WebStorm has what's called their inspections built in. And so if I want to, I'll turn it off in the live editor, but I can actually turn it on as part of their inspections. And then what I can do is I can say I want to inspect this code, and I can choose whatever. I can choose all the files. I'm just going to choose this current file. It gives me a list of problems that it found, and part of that will come from things like JS hint, and part of it will come from just WebStorm itself. So here it's telling me that some things that it found, unresolved variables, in some cases, unterminated statements, so that's this line here. It'll even find spelling mistakes. It'll find cases where in comments it thinks you misspelled things. And so it's not always finding awesome things, but sometimes it's nice to get a little check to see if it found anything that you didn't realize you were doing. So that's inspections and JS hint. IntelliSense and library support. So I think that their IntelliSense is fairly optimistic. Right now, let's say I'm in this spec file, it has no idea about knockout. If I start typing ko.utils. Something, it'll help me find some things that it thinks might match, but it's not really necessarily semantically accurate for what you're doing right there. But it does have the ability to say that, hey, I'm using this library right now, so try to help me get IntelliSense from it. And the one thing that I just found recently that's really interesting is that when I add one of these libraries, so I'm going to come in here and say that right now I'm using knockout. But one thing that's really interesting is that I can choose to use TypeScript definition files. So I'm not using TypeScript in my project. I don't really even want to use TypeScript or anything, but I can use these TypeScript definition files for a lot of libraries out there, and those files have information about parameters and types and things like that. So when I already have it in here, this knockout definitely typed is that TypeScript stub. Again, I'm not using TypeScript, I'm not doing anything with it. This is just going to help me get some IntelliSense. So if I do something like, ko.apply bindings, now it's telling me, hey, this thing's got 2 arguments, it takes in a view model and optionally a root node. And if I give it, if I give it 3 arguments, it's going to be underlined here, so say invalid number of arguments. But if I give it 2, that'll be fine. If I give it 1, that'll be fine, because now it knows based on that TypeScript definition file, the signatures of some of these methods. So I think I found that really useful. I'm not really been on the TypeScript bandwagon, but this really helps me actually. So, and again, you don't have to have anything to do with TypeScript. It's just pulling in those definition files, which have a lot more information than just trying to look at the library and pick out the APIs. Code completion and indenting. As you'd expect when you start typing things, it'll add braces for you, and it does brace matching, things like that. There is the ability to, on a per project basis, or for the entire globally, basically, it lets you decide things, lots of things, like what you want your tab size to be. Do you want to put spaces before do you want to put spaces before functions? And you can configure all of that, what you want the default for your editor to be, and it'll try to format the code for you when you're doing that. So just for fun, let's say that my tab size is 8 and my indentation is 8. So it'll help me do that as I'm typing my code, but there's also, I forget the keystroke right now, but I can reformat my code too real easily right here. And when I do that, now you see it's formatted differently. So that's kind of useful. I mean, I've been on different projects. Some are using 2 spaces. If it's a client, maybe we're in the client's repository and they have some different style they want to use. So I can have different schemes, and I can pick that on a project-by-project basis to match the style that the project's using. And it's pretty in-depth. I mean, if you really want to get down to it, you can configure it down to a pretty crazy level. And it does a nice job if you paste blocks of code. It does a nice job of formatting it and putting it in the right spot. That's one thing I've really liked about it. Refactoring, I'll just talk about that just very briefly. There's various refactoring options, the ability to pull things out into methods, things like that. Just a quick one, you can do, you can rename a variable and it'll find the appropriate places to update it. So it has some other options with that, but that's refactoring. So debugging, you can debug right in WebStorm. So I can, let me find a decent page to. Trying to think what the best thing for me to debug is. Maybe I got an example in here. Okay. So I can, if I want to, I can set a breakpoint and I can say I want to debug this file. And here I actually hit my breakpoint. But if you would prefer to debug in your editor so you have direct access to your code, it does a pretty nice job of it. I prefer just doing it in Chrome for the browser I'm using, but it does let you step through code. It does let you look at the variables, and it does a pretty nice job with it. This does work for Node as well, so that's probably actually where debugging is a little more useful to me. So this is just kind of a starter Express app, but if I want to set a breakpoint in this app, and then if I want to run my Node app, so it's listening at port 3000. I come over here and say localhost 3000, and then I say, I think users was the route.